Now for today's program. Benji Lovitt and Joel Chasnoff are the co-authors of the book Israel 201, Your Next Level Guide to the Magic, Mystery, and Chaos of Life in the Holy Land, which won the National Jewish Book Award. Benji Lovitt, who made Aliyah in 2006, has performed for audiences around the world, including Birthright Israel, Jewish Federation, synagogues, Hillels, and more. His perspectives have been featured on Israeli television and radio, and in outlets such as USA Today, Time Magazine, BBC Radio, The Atlantic, and The Times of Israel. Benji has opened up for Jim Gaffigan and Alon Gold during their visits to Israel, and he has worked as a cross-cultural trainer with the Ministry of Foreign Affairs to help them overcome cultural divides. Joel Chasnoff is a stand-up comedian with over 20 years of performances. He's presented his unique brand of clean, uplifting Jewish comedy for more than 1,500 Jewish audiences in North America, Europe, Israel, and Australia. Joel is the author of 4 best-selling books, including his comedic memoir, The 188th Crybaby Brigade, about his experience as a combat soldier in the IDF. Joining Benji and Joel today is Moment Editor Sarah Breger, director of Moment's Daniel Pearl Investigative Journalism Initiative. Please welcome Benji Lovitt, Joel Chasnoff, and Sarah Breger.
Hi, thank you, Suzanne, for putting this together, and thank you, Benji and Joel, for being here. I'm excited that we are able to have this program the day after Yom Ha'atzmaut. Your book, Israel 201, I think is like a crash course in Israeli society. And what I liked about it was I think it kind of gave Israel more of a three-dimensional look, as opposed to the flattening or maybe reducing we've seen lately in the media with it just surrounding conflict. But I'm curious how this book came about.
Well, first of all, on behalf of Benji and myself, you got the gist of it, and we're really glad that you did. And that's why it's called Israel 201. Benji and I felt that so many of us are stuck on the 101, the intro to Israel narrative, which is always about a timeline of wars, 48, 56, 67, basically measuring the history of the country in conflict, war, green lines, occupations, who did what to whom. And you could get the idea that there really is nothing more to Israel besides that. And so we wanted to give a deeper look at Israel, like you said, three-dimensional, nuanced, and that's why it's the 201. It's a deeper look at everything that's wonderful about Israeli society, but also aspects of Israeli society which are not great. We wanted this not to be a Disneyland utopian version of Israel, because especially younger readers want more of the nuance and gradients. So we talk about difficult issues as well. And in terms of how it came about, it was literally a discussion that Benji and I had about 5 years ago when Israel turned 71 years old. And we said that for Israel's 75th anniversary, we need a new type of book, one that goes deeper, one that is not about the topics everyone else is writing about. And we started brainstorming all those aspects of Israeli life that we felt people need to know if you really want to understand the country, whether it's ethics in the Israeli army or how tour guides get certified and learn to become so cool, because we all come back from Israel loving our tour guides, to why there are so many cats in Israel and how it's actually a Jewish problem. So it's not the Israel you would typically meet in a book, but one that we think would give you the real story of not just Israel, but what it means to be Israeli.
Yeah, it's amazing. I've talked to so many of my friends whose kids are here for the year right now on a gap year, and numbers for this next year are down. And it turns out that even the most committed Jews in America and abroad who've been here so many times forget. They forget that life here is not what it appears on the news. And if all you know of this country is conflict, no wonder younger generations are becoming more and more disconnected. So it was just critical for us to remind people why we love this country, why it is the most unique place on earth, and why it's worth fighting for, because it is so much more than conflict. And we hope to shed some light on that in the next hour or so.
In the foreword, you write about being both insiders and outsiders, and that having that duality, I think, helps inform the book. I guess I'm supposing that. Did it help inform the book? Do you think it gave you a special perch to be able to talk about Israel?
Benji, go ahead.
Yeah, it's when you make Aliyah. My first year in Israel, a friend's Israeli parents who moved to America told me, from now on, your identity will always be split. When you're in America, you yearn for Israel. When you're in Israel, you yearn for America. You're sort of stuck in the middle. and you're really a bridge between these two communities. So the benefit of having that dual identity is that you can really be an ambassador. We have a way of explaining America to Israelis, and we can explain Israel to Americans. So, only someone who's been here for a pretty long time is able to have the insight, really the 201, and understand why Israelis are the way they are, and but also be able to remember our Americanness enough to communicate that to people back at home.
And I also think that's why an Israeli couldn't write this book and why simply an American couldn't write it. I think an Israeli might take for granted a lot of the things that people like Benji and me are shocked by on a regular basis. And at the same time, I think Americans who don't live in Israel or from somewhere else might simply have a typical knee-jerk reaction to a lot of the phenomena that they meet in Israel without realizing why it actually might make sense and why culturally, psychologically, it's in line with what's normal for in Israel. I think outsiders tend to jump to the, like I said, the gut reaction. And when you live there, you realize that, yeah, maybe Israelis aren't rude. Maybe they're being honest and in a way that's fresh compared to Americans who will invite you for coffee, but not really mean it. And you have to live in Israel to get those and other nuances. And I think also between Benji and me, we've had the run of Israeli experiences. I'm raising kids in Israel, put two of my kids into the army already, and I was a soldier myself. So the army is something that I can really relate to on a family level. Benji is single, by the way. All you Hadassah people out there, if you know any nice single ladies for Benji, put that in the chat. But he knows what the dating scene is like, and he knows how different some of the social aspects of Israel can be from other places. So we each bring our own taste to it as well.
What are some of the misconceptions you think Americans have about Israelis?
I think Benji mentioned one, that all we do is go around talking about the conflict and fighting and war. Another would be, like I just mentioned, that Israelis are rude and blunt and don't care about your feelings. Both of those aren't true. If you ask, when I called my wife, who's in Israel right now, my wife is a Yemenite Persian Israeli, and we talked about the field trip that my son is on and a water bill that arrived late and needs to be paid and all the other minutia of daily life. I mean, it's the daily life that happens in Israel. Now, what's different is that under all of it is the knowledge that we still have hostages in Gaza. Under all of it is the knowledge that we have friends, literally friends, who've lost children in the war in Gaza and need to make Shiva calls, and that the nation is still in this very tenuous point. So there's no such thing as normal daily life that's not colored by any of this. But normal daily life does happen. And as for the rude thing I just mentioned, that's the big stereotype a lot of Westerners come to Israel and feel Israelis are so rude. I actually like it now. I like the honesty. I don't see it as rude anymore. For me, it's more difficult in America where I have to watch what I say and I'm not exactly sure what people mean when they say things. And I like getting the straight news in Israel. And Benji, I'm sure you could add a couple other misconceptions that outsiders might have about Israel besides the ones I mentioned.
Yeah, I just have to say, it's so true everything Joel said. When I first made Aliyah, when I first immigrated to here, I was on the beach with a few immigrants who've been here longer, and they were talking about what gym they go to and this and that, and I thought, I can't wait till I have non-Aliyah related things to talk about. Daily life is just, it's what you're watching on Netflix and, what you're doing over the weekend, and it's even my friends today, I think they still imagine that I'm on Ben Yehuda Street in Jerusalem eating falafel. Life here is normal.
But I think one of the things that's magic about Israel is that the normal and the special mix all the time. So it's normal in Israel to talk to people about Shabbat dinner plans and make your plans for Shabbat dinner. It's normal when Sukkot comes around for the entire town square of Ra'anana, where I live, to be converted into a big sukkah sale where they sell everything from snap together sukkahs to lulav and etrog and lighting. And that for me is what is so special, is where the quote unquote holy and the normal mix. And when the DJ on the radio tells you what the Torah portion is on Friday morning and what time Shabbat starts, and when buses say Shabbat Shalom on the top on Friday afternoon as they're closing off for the weekend, to me, those are the moments that still make it a very special place where the mundane and the Jewish mix.
I got a good one. Since Joel mentioned that I'm enjoying the dating scene in Tel Aviv. Americans often don't realize that this is not just America in the Middle East. It's easy to go to a supermarket here or a mall and things look very familiar, but we're a Middle Eastern country, and the best place to really understand the vibe here is at the shuk, the outdoor market where people are yelling, it's a little grimy and everything is negotiable. That's Israel, and that's why the boundaries are less clear. We're in each other's space. Someone in America will ask me, "Oh, you're dating someone. Is she Israeli or she's American?" And I might say she's Colombian, and it will blow their minds because we don't often meet in many parts of America Jews from all corners of the world. And here, your best friends could be South African, Australian, from any corner of the world. So this really is I think we'd all agree that one of the most special parts about this country are the people. And it's true, we really are a mosaic of Jews from all over the world.
Do you find that you often end up hanging out with Anglos just because that's, the culture you're used to, or that's kind of where you gravitate?
I
think we have different answers. Benji, go ahead.
I have Israeli friends who I adore and I met even before I moved here. But at the end of the day, they say, birds of a feather flock together. And when I first moved here, I said, I'm not going to be one of those Americans who mostly, oh, yes, I am. At the end of the day, you want to be with people whose values are most similar to yours. And it's just easier to express myself in English. Not just that, I'm a big NBA fan, sports. I want to talk to Americans who like NBA. And a lot of my friends are people who grew up in young Judea, Jewish summer camp like I did. So one-on-one, I have a lot of dear Israeli friends. But, if you come to my birthday party, you're most likely to see other Anglos, we call them, native English speakers.
So for me at this point, most of my friends in social circle are Israeli. And I think there's two big differences between my situation and Benji's. One is that I did do the army when I was 24 and made a lot of my close friends then. The army really is the ultimate melting pot where if you want to know Israeli society, the good, the bad, the ugly, being in the army really introduces you to what Israel is like and what the true Israeli is like. Not just the ones that they send to your summer camp who are always the best Israelis, but the true Israeli from all over the country who you might not otherwise meet. And so that Israeli list penetrated me a bit in the army. The second big factor is raising kids there. You naturally become friends with the parents of your children's friends. And so you sort of form social circles just around the networks of raising a family. And most of those people are Israeli. And I guess a third difference, my wife is a Sabra Israeli, Yemenite Persian who grew up in the Tel Aviv, Bnei Brak area. And so a lot of, we have a lot more Israeli in our blood already. And I think it makes it easier for us to cross the boundary.
I'm curious what misconceptions Israelis have about Americans when you talk to them.
It's less than they used to be because so many more Americans have traveled, so many more Israelis have traveled to the U.S. and can see what American life might be like on, shows on Netflix, and there's so much more exposure to American culture. I still think that there is that conception of, we put this in the book, Americans live in mansions and, and to an extent, it's true. The average middle-sized house in Kansas City would be a mansion in most parts of Israel. You just don't have houses like that. I think since October 7th, and certainly in the past month, Israelis are becoming a lot more aware of what it means to be Jewish in America. Israelis never really paid that much attention to SJP marches at Berkeley or what happened at Columbia, but now Israelis are watching it and are really horrified, and it's more in the Israeli consciousness of what it means to be a Jew outside of Israel. I don't think that's something most Israelis thought so deeply about before. So I actually think the misconceptions might be changing. Benji, what would you say about this?
Yeah, in the same way we think Israelis are rude, and sometimes they are, but it's if you dig deeper, they are honest, they are direct, and they value that. They see someone like an American maybe being what they call fake as being not someone they might be close to. If you're such a good friend, why would you not tell me what you think? When in fact, we don't mean to be fake. Sometimes we are. In every stereotype, there's a kernel of truth, but we're tactful, we're inclusive, we're diplomatic. We say we learn.
Nice.
What's that?
I said we're Minnesota nice.
Oh yeah, I know that one.
Yeah.
Well, there's actually been, when writing the books, I read a bunch of academic studies on this because one of our big sections is on the Israeli character. And there are a number of papers on the differences between Americans who live in Israel and Israelis who are native to Israel. And the big difference that they found is that in American culture, smoothing out a situation, smoothing out the bumps is so important. So whatever conflict it is, the first instinct is to like tamper it down and make it smooth. Whereas for Israelis, if there's conflict, it's normal and you kind of go in that direction. I will say, as someone who lived in New York for 20 years with an Israeli wife, she never felt fully at home in the US. She always felt that there was a part of her personality that had to be censored, that she never could fully speak her mind and never knew with 100% certainty what other people were saying. So it does go both ways.
You mentioned housing, and one thing I enjoyed about the book is that the housing chapter, but also just I learned a lot of things that I didn't necessarily know before, and a lot of it was from your interviews with people. I'm curious why you chose to have this both be kind of half observational and then half interviews with experts from different walks of Israeli life.
Yeah, there are 75 short sections in the book, each one 1,000 words, and every single one has at least one expert, whether it's a social psychologist, Tamar Katriel, who's dedicated her life to studying the Israeli personality and how it's different. Benji interviewed Avi Yissakarov, who co-created the television show Fauda about show business in Israel. And the one you're referencing, I talked to a professor at Tel Aviv University about the real estate market in Israel and why it's so out of whack and different, and the laws of supply and demand don't apply. We really wanted this to be more than just Joel and Benji's point of view on what it's like to live in Israel. We wanted people to come away with the confidence that what we were telling them was backed up by people who've dedicated their lives to these movements and to these ideas. And I think it also makes the book more special when you know that, wow, there are Israelis who study traffic, that their whole life is dedicated to studying traffic safety. And why would they do that? And I guess they must really love the country if they are dedicating themselves to this. So we also wanted to share that element as well, that there are so many more Israelis than the ones you might stereotypically think of. It's not just the high-tech CEO or the kibbutznik or the Air Force pilot. There's a whole, strata of Israelis dedicating their lives to making the country better. And we wanted to show them both their knowledge and opinions and also just expose them to them as well.
That was one of the absolute highlights, if not the highlight, of writing the book, getting to meet the most interesting, amazing people from all walks of life. We profiled the famous basketball game, sort of Israel's version of the Miracle on Ice, when America beat the USSR in hockey in 1980. Well, Maccabi Tel Aviv beat a Russian team in Europe, and that was our version of it. And I interviewed a guy named Alcy Perry. And yeah, I could read about the game on Wikipedia, but when I met this non-Jewish basketball player, African-American, who made Aliyah, converted, made Aliyah, and hear him come alive, remembering this great game and reflecting why it was so important, because the parents of the coach were Holocaust survivors. I got to relive this game through him. And it just gave us information we never would have gotten otherwise.
One person you interviewed that I really enjoyed was the the person who created niche dating websites.
Yeah.
Could you talk a little bit about that and how you sort of came across him?
Yeah, Yuval was a neighbor of mine in Ra'anana, and I knew he was in high tech, and his kids have kids in the same school as mine were. That's how we got to meet. And the more I started to get to know him, the more I realized it wasn't just high tech he was in, but that he specialized in creating niche dating sites. So vegans who love other vegans, so like vegan websites. People who are physically challenged, handicapped. I'm not sure what the correct PC word is. There's no PC in Israel, but websites for them so they can meet each other. My favorite one was Hot Woman, Rich Man. That is his actually most popular website. It's where really, not to objectify our women in the audience here, but where really good-looking women can join for free, and then men have to pay some exorbitant sum, I think 500 shekels a month, which actually isn't that much. It's about $130, but for Israel, that is a huge amount to pay. And so what it does is it automatically weeds out anyone who's not rich. And it's basically pairing up really gorgeous women with really rich guys, and it's a very, very popular site. And how do you get into it? He just noticed that there was room for it. And I think he heard other people talking about how they feel like the dating websites were all the same and they couldn't meet who they really wanted. Two of his other very popular ones are matching two people who want to have a child, but they don't want to be married. And so they co-create this child, they co-parent the child, and also a lot of swinger websites. It's kind of becoming popular in Israel for married couples to agree to open up their marriages, and they want to meet other like-minded couples. And he told me some funny stories about someone going to one of these swinging parties and seeing his childhood rabbi there. So like there's the people participating in these are not also the people you might expect. But again, where else would you read this? You're never going to learn about this kind of Israel on a 2-week trip or in any of the other books that typically focus on green lines and disputed land.
I don't know any of those apps. I was rejected from the rich one. I don't qualify for that. But really, the big takeaway is that's chutzpah and good chutzpah.
Right.
To not care what people think, to say, I'm going to do my part in Startup Nation to meet a need or be innovative. There's a lot of entrepreneurs here who have failed, but that's just the first step to success. Israelis are not afraid to fail, and that's what makes them so creative.
Another part of the book that was actually not funny, but I found very moving was the discussion about lone soldiers, and particularly lone soldiers who were Israeli, but maybe were estranged from their families for some reason. Is that something you guys knew about before? Is that something discussed in Israel? Because it's definitely not discussed in, American Jewish circles.
Right. So just what a lone soldier is, defined by the army. A lone soldier is any soldier serving in the army whose neither parent, is living in Israel at the time. When I was a soldier back in 1997 and 98, there were maybe 200 lone soldiers in the entire IDF. Today, there are more than 7,000 lone soldiers, typically from countries all over the world that you wouldn't expect. Not just the US and England, but also Australia, Sweden, Denmark, Japan, Thailand. 70 countries have soldiers serving in the IDF right now. But of those 7,000 lone soldiers I just mentioned, only half, 3,500, are these foreign lone soldiers. The other half are Sabras. These are Israelis who are born in Israel and who grow up in Israel, but who have no connections with their family. It could be that their parents are not married and one of them is alcoholic and the other is violent, and so the kid grows up living on the streets. Many of them are of an LGBTQ background from the ultra-Orthodox Haredi community, that they get kicked out of their homes because there's no room for being LGBTQ, and they live on the streets. And one of the jobs in the army in Israeli society is not just to defend the country, but to really take in people and give them what's known in Hebrew as a ma'arechet, a system, a family to belong to. There's a whole branch of the IDF dedicated to education, where one of the most elite jobs for young women is to be a teacher to these 18-year-olds who never finished high school, to help them get their high school diplomas while they're in their army service. And it was really important to me, as a former lone soldier, to shatter the stereotype of what's typically the really sexy narrative. We're in love with the idea of the brave lone soldier leaving New Jersey and turning his back on college to go defend the Jewish homeland. And we raise a lot of money for the IDF based on that concept. But what gets totally lost is the idea that there are 3,500 lone soldiers in Israel who are growing up on the streets, who have no connections with their families. And the army is their family. When their platoon mates go home on Shabbat to their moms and dads who cook for them and give them a car to drive, these soldiers go home to it's called a pnimiya, sort of like a dormitory, almost like an orphanage. And they don't have that sort of family background supporting them. And we just really wanted to introduce this aspect of Israeli society too. A lot of Israelis are not even aware of this segment of lone soldiers. Before the death of Michael Levin in 2006, who was a lone soldier from Philadelphia, generally Americans didn't know about Israelis didn't know about lone soldiers at all. But then Michael Levin became the face of lone soldiers, and they were aware of these foreign ones. But Israelis still aren't. There's not much knowledge about the Sabra ones who grew up in Israel. So that was that was meaningful to us to put in there, and another aspect of society that we thought people might not otherwise know if we didn't cover it.
You wrote the book, well, the book came out a year ago. I assume you wrote it earlier than that. Would you have written it in a different way if you were writing it now, post October 7th?
I don't think we would have written it in a dramatically different way because most of it was not related to war. What's funny is that this book came out about a year ago, and we forget that even before October 7th, 2023 was already the most tumultuous year in the history of Israel, with the 9 months of judicial reform and protesters on each side. We have a new edition coming out where we interview Noah Ephron, Dr. Noah Ephron.
It's out, Benji. The copies I'm selling now on tour are the new edition.
Oh, fantastic. I got to get to America. Joel, can you bring me some copies in your suitcase when you come back?
There you go. But tell them about the new edition, Benji.
Yeah, so Noah Ephron is, some of you may know him as the host of the Promised podcast. He recently won a seat on Tel Aviv City Council for the second time. And we interviewed him to find out what has changed about this country since October 7th, what has not changed. And it will actually have you feeling more optimistic. He wrote a beautiful piece for the Times of Israel this week about Yom Ha'atzmaut. And as awful as things are now, a little bit before my time, but 50 years ago with the Yom Kippur War, Israel went through the same shock and the feelings of existential dread that this might be the end of the current state. And it took some time, but Israel came back stronger than ever. And there's reason to think that things might be the same now. After October 7th, we had this incredible outpouring of unity and volunteerism and creativity. And there's a long way to go, but there are still things to be proud of in this country.
And just to add, in addition to that interview with Noah, there's other chapters that have been updated. Any place in the book where we felt there would be something missing if the October 7th context wasn't given here, we added it. So this new edition really does try to take account of the new Israel that we're living in. But again, one of the points of the book is to remind you of the bird's eye view, that it's still so special that we have a Jewish state, and there is a long road ahead of us. It's not simply ending right here.
Do you think Israelis have changed since October 7th?
I absolutely do. I think the country, and Benji, I know you want to answer too. I'll keep mine quick. I in many, many ways, and not just change psychologically, but I think that we are going to see real changes logistically. I don't think Israelis will ever vote the same way again. There was this idea that you vote for your party and hope that your party would cross the threshold to get into the Knesset. And a lot of times parties wouldn't even get in. The Meretz party didn't even make it into the last government. And the reason was they didn't join with Labor ahead of time. I think from now on, parties will form their coalitions ahead of the elections to guarantee that certain elements of society have a voice, and Israelis will vote differently. I think the whole question of Haredim, the ultra-Orthodox serving in the Israeli army, for 76 years, Israelis complained that they weren't doing their share, but just sort of kind of took it. I think that's going to change. It might be next week. It might be in a year from now, but that cannot continue. And I think Israelis are also going to be very much more thoughtful about who their leaders are, and realizing that the messenger is the message, that just because a leader might be correct, if that leader isn't necessarily liked by others or is conveying the wrong type of personality to other leaders in the world, I'm not naming names here, I'm just saying, that reflects poorly on Israel as well. So I think Israelis are going to think a lot differently about some of these very logistical day-to-day aspects of life. Benji?
This sounds crazy now, but about a year ago, I asked an Israeli friend, do you think it's still true that every single Israeli in this country knows someone who's fallen in a war or from terror? And it could be argued a year ago that Israel had never been safer before. That's no longer the case. And we say in our book that we always talk about PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder. Israelis are not even post-trauma, they're still in it. And this sense that, especially of people in the Western Negev near the Gaza border, they believed they were safe, and we all put faith in our army. one of the things Noah Ephron mentions is it shattered the illusion that technology can keep us safe and that our army can do no wrong, just like 50 years ago after the Yom Kippur War. But people are really traumatized. I know people who were extreme left-wing in their words, and now they're extreme right-wing, which is a dramatic and change that's for me hard to believe intellectually. But when people are that traumatized, it goes beyond rational explanation. We still have tens and tens of thousands of domestic refugees, people who cannot go back to their homes on the Lebanese border. It's so early to know what's going to happen to them, but there's no more return to the status quo. Maybe this is the time where we no longer say, yeah, beseder, it'll be okay. Like Joel said, we may now challenge our leaders in a way we never did before and demand a new contract. It's no longer this, we're going to pay our taxes and join the army, and we trust you'll take care of us. I think a lot of the trust is now gone, and our leaders are going to have to earn it back.
I'll just add, I think the mentality toward our Arab neighbors has changed as well, that a lot of people feel it might now be naive to believe that we could live in some sort of coexistence peacefully with Arab neighbors. It might be more of a case of living peacefully through our own strength and through separation, but not necessarily in a lovey-dovey kind of way. And I think also a lot of realization that as bad as our external enemies are, there's another threat, which is our internal disunity. I think we saw what can happen when Israelis turn against each other and become ununified. And so often you hear in Israel, people, when voices are raised, people saying, hey, but let's remember that we are one people, and reminding each other of how important unity is. Because our biggest conflicts in the years to come could be, with the religious who are living in the West Bank and who might need to leave the West Bank in order to make a viable two-state solution. They're the Haredim, those among us who aren't serving in the IDF. These are some of the internal conflicts that Israelis are realizing we have to deal with and are as important as the others as well.
Just a clarification, what I'm pretty sure Joel meant, when we're talking about our Arab neighbors, we're usually talking about the Palestinians in the West Bank and in Gaza. One of the, if not silver linings, one pleasant outcome of October 7th is that there was no internal revolution among the millions of Arab Israeli citizens. Hamas on October 7th, they called this the Al-Aqsa flood in order to incite and inspire Arab Israeli citizens to rise up against the Jewish Israelis. It didn't happen. And thank goodness, because we have to figure out how to live together within the borders.
And I'll tie that back to the book. We have several chapters dedicated to the Arab population in Israel, whether it's about Druze high school students in the Galilee, or why there's so many Arab pharmacists and doctors. It was really important to us that if 22% of Israel's population is not Jewish, we need to tell a little bit of their story as well.
Yeah, I definitely thought that the chapter about why is your pharmacist Arab was very interesting, and that how the stereotype of a Jewish doctor is now replaced with, every mother wants their kid to be an Arab doctor. If they're...
Yeah, I gotta say, along with one of the thrills of getting to meet all these people, Joel and I learned a ton. I mean, we came out of this with so much more knowledge and discoveries we never would have imagined.
So you were discussing a lot of the political situation. I'm curious how Yom HaAtzmaut was for you guys yesterday, with your friends and with your family, how people felt about, a day of celebration when things don't feel very celebratory.
It was, it's hard for me to speak about all time. I mean, I'm older than, I've been around for half of Israel's existence, but I don't know what it was like 50 years ago. But let's say since I've moved here, it was the least festive Yom HaAtzmaut that there's been. A lot of people didn't even want to say Chag Sameach, because how could be Sameach, happy, when there are still 130 something hostages in captivity. So, there is always the torch lighting ceremony led by the government. It was pre-recorded this year because it was said it was for security reasons, but I think it was really thought that the government didn't want to be booed by a live audience. There was an alternative Independence Day event, sort of a grassroots event, where instead of lighting the torches to symbolize the 12 tribes, we always have 12 heroes of the previous year light them. The people got together and extinguished or doused torches, not in an anti-Israel way, but as a message that part of us is not whole. So it was a lot of people took down the Israeli flags that they often fly from their car windows, and they put up a yellow ribbon in support of the hostages. There's still a lot to be proud of this country, but people have very mixed feelings, and it's hard to be fully celebratory when our brothers and sisters are not all home.
What I do love about living in Israel is that it's a country that cares so much. You know, one thing that always bothered me in America growing up was that how Memorial Day is treated like a picnic, literally with barbecues and mattress sales, and the swimming pool opens, and absolutely ignoring the veterans who gave their lives and limbs to keep our country free and democratic. And, you know, like so many things in America, it's been bastardized and turned into a commercial holiday. I like that in Israel, people are still connected to the idea that we don't take our country for granted. My 13-year-old went to the Yom HaZikaron Memorial Day ceremony with friends the other night. I like that. I like that at the age of 13, they are paying attention to those who sacrificed so that they can live in the country they do. So even with the many, many difficulties of living in Israel, and I think if you read the book, you'll come away understanding why it is a difficult country to live in. It's still a very meaningful place to live. And it's why, you know, I come to the US a lot, and every time I'm here, I'm like, wow, there's Target and there's parking and it's cheaper and so many parks and baseball. But I always go back to Israel knowing, you know, there's really nowhere else I could live, because it is meaningful for these reasons. And the fact that people care so much about what their Independence Day is going to be, you know, that's, I think, emblematic of what Israel means to guys like Benji and myself.
So if you come visit and an Israeli says something that seems a little bit forward or not their business, just remember it's because they care and they see you as part of their family.
Yeah, totally.
Has your comedy changed at all since October 7th? Or are people interested in hearing jokes still?
Well, both of us have been on tour since I wouldn't say October 8th we were performing, but I was in the US the week after October 7th to start performing a tour that had been, you know, prearranged. And at the beginning, it was much slower, you know, a much different act. And even now, I would say it's less of a stand-up show, how you doing, jokes, and more of stories and reflections with a lot of laughs about the absurdity of trying to navigate being a Jew in the world in 2024 and living in Israel and raising a family in Israel. I mean, that stuff is absurd and it's poignant and it's funny. But I think it's less that the jokes are different and more that the style of delivery is a lot more in line with what it needs to be at a tenuous time like this. But as for the question, should there even be comedy right now? I mean, over and over, Benji and I are getting comments of, you know, thank you, this is therapeutic. And other comedians we know in Israel as well. Comedy clubs are open in Israel. And comedians are thanked for giving the medicine of laughter and relief and escape for 1 hour. It doesn't mean that all the horrors we're facing go away or that we're ignoring the hostages. It just means that for psychological reasons, we need to be able to laugh at ourselves as well. And so it's going well. It's the delivery is different, but people really need it, and we're hearing that in ways we didn't before.
The humor in Israel is definitely different. And if I try to tell some of the jokes the Israeli comedians tell right now, they might sound out of touch. But if you were here and if you're in the club, you get it, because when you're in the family, you can say certain things. You're out of the family, it's different.
Can you give an example without the punchline, Benji? Can you give an example of the type of premise a joke a comedian might tell right now in Israel?
Yeah,
to sort of share with the audience?
This is a joke I did during Pesach with Joel for a show of mostly tours here in Israel. So, you know, jokes about death, always not fun, you know, never funny, off limits, but what we're coping with, what we're dealing with, our frustrations and fears. And, you know, I have a joke about, you know, I was in America for a couple months after October 7th. And when I came back, I realized things have really changed a lot. You know, I went to the grocery store and I bought a big package of toilet paper, and where it usually says the brand, Lily, and now said the national slogan, B'yachad Nenatzech, together we will win. And I thought, what have these people been eating? So that gets a laugh. It's about, you know, it's not just about October 7th, but it's about everything that's happened afterwards and the solidarity. And, you know, there's a comedian named Yossi Tarablus who jokes about how he keeps all his kids sleeping in the safe room. And the best part is that he saves on air conditioning bills from the rest of the apartment. So we know that there was humor during the Holocaust in the camps. Medical professionals have very dark senses of humor because they're dealing with life and death. People who have had, I've heard people make jokes at a shiva, not to be tasteless, but because that's how we stay sane. That's how we cope. And life is awful and difficult. And by laughing, we can make it a little less difficult. So, Israelis are making jokes about all kinds of things. They're making jokes about anti-Semitism in America, and they're making fun of college presidents. And I think it's an element of revenge. It's an element of making ourselves feel better, because the alternative is to cry, and nobody wants to do that.
That's a very Jewish idea also, not just Israeli.
Yeah, some of you have surely heard of a TV show, for example, called Eretz Nehederet, a beautiful country, and it's sort of our answer to Saturday Night Live. There's a lot of clips that went viral even in America because they were in English after October 7th, with Michael Rappaport, who's become a big pro-Israel advocate. So if you go online, you can see a lot of them. There's some funny stuff.
Toward the end of the book, you list different times that I guess maybe you poll friends where they made mistakes in the Hebrew language that were really funny. I'm curious if you guys had any, or what were your mistakes in the Hebrew language that you in particular remember?
Wow. Well, we included that chapter just because our whole final section of the book is about Aliyah and moving to Israel, which really is a movement into and of itself. And we wanted to sort of break some of the myths about Aliyah, like who moves to Israel. It turns out that the people who make Aliyah, they're not the most Zionist. They're not the most religious. They're the ones who are most comfortable dealing with the unknown. When they studied Olim, immigrants to Israel, they all had a very high tolerance for dealing with unknown situations and not necessarily having certainty in their lives. So we wanted to introduce that concept. And one of the funny ones is the mistakes that Americans or others make when moving to Israel. What were mine? I think back when I served in the IDF, just misinterpreting instructions and thank God nothing deathly happened, but not really knowing. It was more like not really knowing what was going on and just running after everybody else because my Hebrew wasn't perfect and sort of following the pack. Benji, you might have more specific mistakes, or you could share one from the book to give our audience a taste of what we were writing about.
So when we put out a call, if you ever ask people for mistakes, they'll usually give sexually suggestive ones because those are the most embarrassing. But I've sort of collated ones over the years at my shows, and the best ones I think are the ones you can never even dream up because they're so off the wall. Someone told me once he was asked after he made Aliyah, "Hey, do you want to get pita with za'atar?" And he said, "Who's za'atar?" So za'atar is a spice, if you don't know, but who would ever dream of that? That to me is hilarious.
We're not going to tell you. We're not going to share the R and X rated ones, but maybe email us later. We can have a session.
In the Aliyah chapter, you also talk about the 5 stages of Aliyah, which I thought were funny. Could maybe you want to share them with our audience, and also if you guys went through those stages?
I remember them, Benji?
Yeah,
I can say them if you don't remember.
Yeah,
I can't recite them all, but we compare Aliyah to a relationship with a loved one, and
not just a loved one, with a romantic loved one.
Yeah, even though I've not been married, I feel like I'm married to this country because at the beginning you're in the honeymoon stage. They can do no wrong. You put them on a pedestal, and then you start to realize there's the disillusionment or the realization, wow, they're not perfect. You got to take the good with the bad. Then there's the questioning, what have I done? Is this really all there is? And the people who can get past those are the ones who generally stay. And, I sometimes will meet someone who just went on birthright or who's not even been here and wants to make Aliyah. I say, are you nuts? That's like getting married after a first date. You have to really understand your partner or the country you're with. So, the more time you spend here, if you've done a pilot trip, if you've gone on a Masa program, a long-term program here, you're going to understand what this country is really all about. It's not just about eating falafel on Ben Yehuda Street and how Israelis are really good looking. It's about how, in spite of the difficulty, it's so meaningful to live here.
I agree.
You agree? Okay.
I think I'm on that. I think I've
thoughts.
made it through the 5 stages because they're definitely, joining the army, especially, there's that idea of I'm going to become a Lion of Judah soldier protecting the country, and then you realize like a lot of the army is boring, and then a lot of it's a very Israeli army, meaning a lot of shouting and yelling, and instructions aren't always clear and improvising. But it, like Benji said, if you can get through all those stages, it does become more meaningful, and it lasts. I will add that statistically, we learned that 50% of all immigrants to Israel from English-speaking countries end up leaving within 5 years. It just becomes too difficult.
That's interesting. Was there a moment that you guys knew, hey, I'm Israeli now?
Because you're never fully, look, a lot of these words are, again, like when I'm here, I feel American. When I'm there, I feel Israeli. I said to someone once, I'm going home to see my parents. He said, what do you mean home? Isn't this your home? I'm like, when I look forward to going home to see my parents. And when I'm tired of being there, I say, ugh, I'm so ready to get home. So these terms, they're not, they don't have fine lines. They're very blurry. And, sometimes I will go back to America. I'll say, I'll be proud of myself for being Israeli. And then other times when I'm here, I'm like, I am so not Israeli. But that's probably a good thing. I don't want to be fully Israeli. I want to maintain my tact and being on time and long-term planning. Those are things I never want to give up. I just want to adopt the best qualities of Israel.
I think it's less about, oh, there's one magic moment where I've turned the corner and now I'm Israeli. And it's more about having certain moments standing out as, wow, this is a very Israeli moment, whether it's driving the first daughter to the induction center for the day she went into the army. Like that was it hit me like, wow, this is an extremely Israeli moment. Um, and then there are others, whether maybe that aren't as poignant and as big as that one, but others that strike you, or even just having a conversation with my auto mechanic. And I read about this in the book. Having a very deep conversation with the mechanic who fixes my car. The tires were the brakes were being tightened by one of his guys, and I was talking to him, and he started asking about marriage therapy and how my marriage, like these very intimate, deep conversations, which even with some of my closest friends in the U.S. I've never spoken about. But in Israel, you don't have the borders, and so you can speak intimately. It struck me as like this is a very Israeli moment. So I think immigrants are constantly having these reminders that, oh, we are also Israeli as well. But then there are certain moments when we realize we'll never be fully and completely Israeli. And believe me, we have those too.
So let's turn to questions in the few minutes we have left.
Sure.
And also people can write in questions in the chat or in the Q&A if they have any. The first one is, what didn't make it into the book?
So much. Benji, I know you have a nice list, so why don't you share?
Yeah, I remember asking Joel, we had a list of about 75 things, and I said,
no, more than 75.
Yeah, the list was much longer. And I said, which ones are we going to pick? He said, whichever ones we do first, whichever ones feel right. At the last minute, we needed an emergency chapter. I really wanted to interview an Ethiopian immigrant about their journey by foot from Ethiopia to here. We ended up not needing it. There's a place called Achziv land. Have you heard of it, Sarah?
Yes, I've been there actually. Yeah.
Really, I'm not going to put you on the spot, but it's this tiny piece of land that an old hippie guy claims and sort of created his own country. And you go and you get your passport stamped, and the government said, we're not gonna deal with this crazy guy. We'll let him stay there. So you've been there?
I have, yeah. And the guy was weird, and the interesting part is the Israeli government doesn't seem to care.
Yeah, they're like, it's not worth fighting with them.
Right.
So for me, the reason.
Imagine.
But I was the one who nixed that chapter, and to me there had to be 3 criteria met. First of all, is there an expert we can talk to for this chapter who can shed light on it? Second of all, is it just fun to write and interesting to me and Benji? Because if we're not invested personally, it won't work. But the third one is, does this chapter somehow shed light on Israeli society overall? And as quirky and as interesting as what you just mentioned, Achziv land is, I feel it doesn't really speak to the country and really deepen one's understanding of what it means to be Israeli. And so that's why I pushed to not have that one go in. So it had to meet those 3 criteria. And what's nice is we have more than we ended up using, and there is enough for another book, whether it's Israel 202 or Israel 301, or depending what it would be called. But we have thoughts of taking it further because the reception of this one's been pretty nice.
How long ago did each of you make Aliyah, or how long have you lived in Israel?
Benji made Aliyah 17 years ago. Am I right? From Dallas. I made Aliyah kind of twice. I made Aliyah the first time in 1997, specifically in order to serve in the IDF. After my service in the Army, I left, and then in 2016 moved back with my wife and kids. And so much time had passed that we sort of had to make Aliyah again. So the second Aliyah was 7.5 years ago, almost 8 years ago, that we've been living as a family in Israel.
Do you guys think about the anti-Semitism happening around the world? Is it something you guys worry about?
Benj?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm American. I've got nieces, nephews on college campuses. I have friends there. I mean, yeah, I imagine if I were a Hillel director, what would I do? I feel like what's different about this current moment is that it's not just an Israel thing. October 7th. So we know it's a worldwide Jewish thing, and for as absurd as it is that an innocent Jewish student is getting harassed for the actions of Israelis or Palestinians here, this is why we have to come together. And I think Israelis are realizing we're all in this together, and this affects us not just here, if we travel around the world. So yeah, it's depressing, but it's uplifting to know that we all have each other's backs, and we'll get through this somehow.
It's definitely on my mind for various reasons. As someone who goes back and forth between the two countries, I'm obviously horrified by a lot of what I see. It makes me take Israel even less for granted and realize just how important it is that we have. I also think there might be some overestimation of just how many people in America actually care about the Gazans' plight and are anti-Israel, and that we're hearing the loudest voices, but not necessarily the plurality or majority of voices. I think a lot more people actually support Israel. I'm not saying vehemently, but support Israel than we realize, but they're just not out necessarily marching and making noise. But I think about it, especially because I have kids who are of college age, or their peers are just now finishing college, and we're seeing what they're going through. And despite how hard it is in Israel, I'd rather raise my kids there right now.
Well, this is a hard one. Are you hopeful about the a possibility of a two-state solution? Is that something you believe in still?
Yeah, I think most people here, and the polls have consistently shown that most people believe and support a two-state solution because we can't be together. And that's not a racist thing to say. That's not, it's not a terrible thing to say. It's a realistic thing that we need to live not in the same state. What does make me hopeful is that when I hear about a potential Saudi Arabia-US plan, it reminds me of how little the world understands this. Because this is so much bigger than even just Israel and the Palestinians. From what I understand, because the US and Saudi Arabia very much want a deal, Saudi Arabia has the potential to impose on the Palestinians, whether that means Sinwar and the leaders of Hamas get extradited, if they want to make it happen, and if the very powerful parties in the world want to make it happen, it can happen. So, who in the world thought we'd have peace with Sadat in Egypt just years after the Yom Kippur War? Who thought we'd have peace with Jordan? So, no matter how much we all think we know about the Middle East, there's so much that we don't know. We can't predict the future. I don't think, Hamas and all Israelis are suddenly going to be singing Kumbaya tomorrow, but there are conversations being had behind doors that we don't even know about. So I'm hoping that's
and remember,
a possibility.
Peace doesn't have to be about kumbaya. I think most peaces in the Middle East happen for the opposite reason, that we need separation. I personally am more convinced than ever that we need a Palestinian state, a two-state solution, for the reasons that we need separation. To be completely honest, I don't want to get too political here, but I think we have the wrong leadership right now in order to make that happen. I think the right leader would see an opportunity and would be thinking long-term what is best for Israel, and instead we don't have the leadership to move in that direction, because it's much more concerned with staying in power. So that is what is very, very frustrating to many Israelis, is the fact that we don't feel we have a leader right now who truly has the best interest of Israel in mind. But I'm sure you don't want us to get into a political discourse, so I'll stop right there.
Joel, were you going to announce on this call now that you're going to run for prime minister, or should I not have revealed that?
We'll let that one go.
It's coming. So we just have time for one more question.
And by the way, before we break, we want to share a little something in the chat with the group, if you don't mind. So just make sure we leave a minute for that, okay?
Oh yeah. But someone wanted to know, they want to buy your book, but how do they know that they'll get the updated edition?
Great question. If you order on Amazon, it's likely that you would get the first print because probably Amazon stock is now the it's still that early run. I guess if you wanted to be sure, you could email me, and I'm in the US now, and I'll be back in the US in June, and I could send you that and charge you for the shipping and charge you for my time, and it'd be more expensive. I'm just kidding. I wouldn't charge for the time, but that would be the one sure way. I imagine that by July, all the stocks everywhere will be updated, but that's probably the best I can do right now.
And I think you can put something in the chat now if you want to. Let me
Yeah.
know
So what I wanted to let you do is, we're always trying to stay in touch with people who care about Israel as much as we do, and we found a few different ways to do that. Number one is that I host a podcast every week called Inside Israel with Joel Chasnoff. And the whole idea is to really just do this, to bring people Israel, but from the point of view of the people who live there. So it's not just regurgitating the headlines and you see on CNN, but it's really showing you how are Israeli families dealing with the news? What do Israelis actually think about the things that are affecting us right now? And to introduce you to stories you're not going to hear about in American media. So the way I do it is it's a live webinar once a week, usually on a Tuesday, Wednesday, or Thursday night. And then I take the recording and upload it to Apple Podcasts and to Spotify Podcasts. So you can just listen through your podcast player. So if you want the links to that for the live ones or the links to listen, I'm going to put those right here. It's joelchasnoff.com/podcast.
And we can also send it out when we send out kind of our
that'd be great.
Follow-up email too.
So the other thing that we have is we have a weekly newsletter called Hebrew is Magic. One of my favorite chapters in the book is about the magic and the wisdom in Hebrew words. And every Thursday, I send out a newsletter called Hebrew is Magic, where I take a different Hebrew word and I break it down by looking at the root, the shoresh of the word, and saying what life lesson can we learn from this word. One of my favorite ones since October, a very popular word in Israel right now, which I'd never heard before, is chiyuni. I never heard the word chiyuni. I was touring in November when I called home to my Israeli wife, and she'd obviously been very depressed after what happened in October. But this one day I called home, she sounded different. She sounded a little upbeat for the first time. And I asked her, Dorit, what's different? And she said, well, some friends of mine and we connected with an army unit that's going into Gaza, and we're cooking for them and sending food down to the border, and we're raising money to buy new sleeping bags for them. And I feel so chiyunit. And I said, what does this word mean? And she said, chiyuni means to feel needed by another human being, to feel essential. And it's such a great word that Hebrew has this. And I looked it up. What's the root, the shoresh of chiyuni is chai, which means life. And I just felt it was so beautiful that we're all searching for the secret to life, but Hebrew seems to know that the secret to life is to be needed by others and to be essential. So if you like those sort of word puzzles and the wisdom in Hebrew, you'd go to the same place, joelchasnoff.com, the website, and there's a Hebrew is Magic link. You can put your name and email in. And that's what that's what I wanted to share with you guys, because we'd love to stay in touch.
That's great. And Benji, is there a place we can find you?
Yeah, if you go to benjilovitt.com, you can sign up for a newsletter. It comes out probably once every 3 weeks or so, and I try to highlight different things that are going on in Israeli comedy. A funny sketch I may have come across on Eretz HaHederet, the show I mentioned before. And Joel and I are definitely planning on being back in the States this next year, and we'd love to come to your communities and bring some much-needed humor.
Yeah, we are touring starting in the fall. We're doing a big tour once again together, so we'd love to see you live on the road.
Oh, great. That's fabulous. So we'll send out those links to everyone so they can sign up for the newsletters and everything like that. Thank you very much. This has been a really great conversation.
Thank you. It was a wonderful, did a wonderful job hosting and brought out really the best of what the book is and what we feel about it. So thank you.
And just a reminder for people to sign up for next week's Zoominar. And also a reminder again of the book is called Israel 201, Your Next Level Guide to the Magic, Mystery, and Chaos of Life in the Holy Land. Yes, we all have our copies. Thank you very much. Talk to you all later.
Bye, everyone.
Thank you. Take care, everyone.